In this video, I'm going to give you a synopsis of the best suspension products, seats and seat posts that you can select to achieve whatever you desire. If you read my book, this one over here, you know that I have built my own Brompton project to be a sort of a bicycle version of a Bentley car. If you don't know what the Bentley is like, it looks like a Rolls-Royce, and it is a very luxurious car, just like a Rolls, but it has also been raced. So it is also a very fast accelerating and very sporty car, besides being luxurious. So even on the cover, you can see that I really built it up. It has all the suspension upgrades you can imagine for the bike, but it is also the fastest Brompton I have ever heard of. And this is just one possibility. There are many other configurations you can do in case you want something very light, something very sporty, and I am going to cover all of that in the video. All of the merchandise I'm featuring in the video you can access simply by going to my webpage, and these are the saddles that I recommend. These are the best. Here are some of the suspension products I recommend. I am going to include more than this in the video, and I will be posting extra links for that below. Just scroll down below and then you'll find the links either in my shop or added separately. By the way, I should mention that I have added a whole bunch of new garments. So if you go into the t-shirts on Amazon, I now have this triple bicycle design. I don't think it looks best on a dark background. I would say probably the light or white background would look best, but this one includes all three top bikes that I always talk about on this program: the Brompton, the Birdie, and one of the high-end Moultons as well. But I also have other designs. If you just want a single whatever Moulton or Birdie or whatever, I have those designs as well in every color configuration imaginable. So back to the topic. Notice that when you look at the average folding bike, the seat post is very long and it is slanting backwards. This is a Brompton. The same is true of a Birdie. It's about the same angle. You see something similar on the Moulton, but notice that the Moulton's seat posts are very short because the Moulton is supporting the seat post at a much higher point so that it is much more rigid and much less flexy. It doesn't vibrate as much. This is a sporty and cool configuration, but just keep in mind that you don't have much space here. So if you want a suspension seat post, that is going to have to fit into this smaller space, and I will talk about that in the rest of the video. Let's go for the seats. I'm not too crazy about so-called medium width seats, but I do recommend 2 seats for those that care about this size. Here is the other one. They cost about $130, $140, $150. These are the 2 seats I recommend. They are both products from Brooks in England. This one is a vegan seat and it has a prostate cutout, which I think is really nice. But keep in mind, this is still just so-called medium width. Your seat bones are going to be somewhere here. So it's going to be pretty painful. It's still jackhammering your prostate and your urethra if you're a male. If you're a female, even then it's going to be uncomfortable because you're not sitting on your seat bones. That's why I don't recommend these seats, at least not for most people. But if you want a sporty ride, if you care about the good looks, it certainly looks really good. It's very modern, very sporty. It's actually made of fabric reinforced rubber. So most of this material is rubber, but there is a fabric mesh on the bottom of it that's integrated into the rubber. It is all vegan. No animal cruelty is involved. If you don't care about animals and you want a really, really beautiful seat, then another option for about the same price is this beautiful B15 from Brooks. It actually comes in a number of colors, not just this one. And the leather quality is second to none. Brooks leather is absolutely desirable, and I have owned 3 of their saddles, and if you use the Proofhide that comes with the saddle, or you can buy it separately, and you keep the leather properly cleaned and also protected from the rain, and you cover it with that proof hide 2 or 3 times a year, it's going to look beautiful for the rest of your life. Most of them have some adjustability in it as well, so you can adjust this screw, and as the leather stretches and as it is getting older, you can keep on adjusting it, and you have a lot of adjustment here. So these are excellent products. You can use these with the standard stem that came with your Brompton Birdie or whatever you have. But if you want something a little bit better, then you could go for a nice titanium seat post. And in the case of the Brompton, we have 31.8 millimeters. What most companies sell is 31.6. That means you have 0.2 millimeters of a gap on both sides. That's 0.4. That's about half a millimeter. So in my case, I also bought this 31.6. My Brompton has a 31.8 hole in it. So what I did was I cut out a piece of a fish can and anchovy can that I cleaned up, and I slide that into the hole next to the post, and that seems to work pretty well. The reason I recommend this, well, first of all, this is a beautiful titanium piece. It's going to be very light. If you're going for lightness, and if you bought something like this, a seat that is already very compact and lightweight, even this one is lightweight, and I believe there used to be a version of it with the titanium rails. This may not have that one, and that is even more expensive than this one. You would have to check the Brooks website for it to see if they have it, but in any case, these are light saddles, both of them, at least compared to the more comfortable saddles I will be discussing later on in the video. So a titanium stem would go very well with it because it hardly weighs anything. And if you have a curve like this, look at the bike. The more you increase the angle of the seat post pointing backwards, the more flexing you are going to get. So in this situation, unfortunately, you're not going to get that much of a flex because most of it is just going vertically into this bar. You have a little bit of an angle here, so you are going to get some flexing, and I speak from experience because I used to own one of the titanium seat posts. I had a completely straight seat post. If I was to buy one again, I would definitely go with the curve in it because that's gonna give you even more flexing. You can expect maybe 1/4 of an inch of flexing, maybe a little bit more. Not a 1/2 inch, I don't think, but I might be pessimistic. This is certainly not an earth-shaking kind of damping that you are going to get, but you are going to get something. It's way better than the standard, typically aluminum post that you get with almost any folding bike. Now, if you have a short seat post, then this flexing is not gonna do much because you don't have a long bar. The longer the bar, the more it's going to flex. So for these kinds of long seat post bikes, it really works and it really does something, but it's not gonna work for a short bike. You can buy a seat post like that just because it's lightweight and elegant, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but don't expect much of any suspension from this. Now, the king of all the saddles and the most comfortable of them is this Brooks, which I also used to have. This is the B33 saddle, or at least it used to be called that. They are not mentioning a model name on this one. It has absolutely gorgeous craftsmanship. It is also quite pricey, but not that much more than the other, I guess, already pricey Brooks saddles. So instead of $150, you're gonna be paying about $200. $200 is not bad for a saddle like this one. I used to own this saddle as well. This is the best leather, the best workmanship, and what most people don't realize is that in addition to the springs going up and down, you are also getting a tilting effect because of the front suspension. This front spiral, this goes into the center, and it doesn't really dampen, it doesn't go anywhere, but it ensures that as you press down on the right side, the right spring is going to be compressed more than on the left side, even as you hit a bump. And when you press down on the left side, it tilts, it goes up and down, left, right, which is an amazing thing to have. And because it's such a comfortable and wide saddle, it really helps because the wider the saddle, the more difficult it is to pedal. And that's That's one of the reasons people buy the narrow saddles, because you can pedal on them very aggressively. But if you have a tilting action like this one, and if you tilt the entire saddle a little bit forward so that it's not entirely horizontal, but it tilts a little bit forward, like even more than this, open up a little bit of an angle, and maybe at an angle of 10-15%, so that you're sitting on the slope, you will be able to pedal, even if you want to pedal fast or aggressively. Once again, if you follow the instructions, you keep it clean and dry, and you apply the proof hide at least 2 or 3 times a year, this saddle is gonna last for the rest of your life. I sold mine because I decided to go for something even wider and something that goes with the insane suspension seat post I have. Now this one I would recommend that you use with something elegant, definitely something like this. Either you keep your standard seat post, or you get something like this. I mean, look at how elegant it looks. It's a brushed reflective silver, and it goes very well with this also very chromy looking spring assembly and all the metal that is under the leather of this beautiful saddle. And if you really buff it with proof hide, the leather itself is going to shine. That's not how they come from the factory. That's something you have to do. So I do recommend that if you get this one for comfort, and this is the most comfortable saddle you can get, that you then combine it with something like this. Very simple, very elegant. The suspension you get this way, going with the B33 and the simple, perhaps somewhat flexing titanium, is going to give you a whole lot more than you would get from the stock, which is practically nothing. Aluminum is not a flexi metal. The stock seat it's not a cheap seat. It seems like another cambium from Brooks, but it's not going to give you any suspension at all. If you put the B33 on it, that's going to be like changing over from economy class to business. What about first class? Well, if you want to go even further, then you can get something like this. And it's not cheap to get a redshift, and it's not as beautiful or as elegant as that titanium curve. It doesn't have a curve in it. It has this ugly bump, which is not the most beautiful, but at least it's a smaller bump than you would get from anything else. I am not sure if I would want to use this with the B33, because the B33 is so beautiful. I would rather reject the extra comfort, although this one gives you a lot more comfort, no question about it. It has 35mm of suspension travel compared to a curvy titanium seat post, which might give you 20mm of flexing. So this is about twice as much. Plus you can typically change the whatever is inside, spring or elastomer. You can swap it out, and you can change it to a softer or a harder version depending upon which one is more comfortable, which one suits your installation better. Here is another one. This is also fairly compact. This is the Kinect. Also pretty expensive. It's even bulkier. So I would not use this with a B33. Actually, if you want to use it with something like this, if you're buying it not so much for being super light, but just for being able to pedal more aggressively, this one actually might not look bad, because this is like a very slim saddle, and the Kinect is kind of high-tech, so the whole setup would look pretty high-tech. And they have even a carbon fiber version of it, which looks really techy and futuristic. And you can swap out the springs, so you can vary the hardness. 35mm of travel. This is eminently suitable for something like the Moulton that has very little space here. If you want a lot of cushion, a lot of dampening, and you want to fit it into this space, probably the Kinect is the only thing you can get. There's nothing else that's going to fit here. So the Kinect is a space saver and very high tech. And here is finally the Thudbuster, which is the one I am using. It's featured in the book. At $200, it's not cheap. And you have to get the LT. LT stands for long travel. They make a short travel version with a more compact little elastomer. And you might want to use that with the Moulton, where you don't have space. But if you have space, especially if it's a Brompton, a Birdie, a ProDrive bike where you have these long seat posts. You definitely want to get this one if you want the maximum dampening. This thing has a very, very long travel and so much dampening, it's not funny. Once you tried it, you don't want to go back to anything, and I certainly don't want to go back to even the B33 because of the support I'm getting here. But on the other hand, you cannot put the B33 on top of this because it would look ridiculous. Putting something this tacky looking together with something as ornate as this just looks ridiculous. I actually saw somebody riding a Brompton with this kind of a setup. Obviously the person first bought this one and then it was great for a few months. It's so much more comfortable than the standard setup from the shop, but then he wanted to get more comfortable and then he got that long travel Cane Creek Thudbuster seat post, and he was using them together, but the assembly just looked so ridiculous. You don't want to put anything with the big spring assembly on top of this because it's going to look weird. What you could do from Brooks, England, you could try the B72. This is the one suspension seat they have that doesn't have a spring assembly under it, but just a loop. So it's a very elegant, very beautiful Brooks seat. You see the gorgeous leather, and it does have some suspension, but it's not, and it's wide, it's comfortable. Not as wide as the B33, by the way, but it's relatively compact. So you could put this on top of the Thudbuster if you wanted to. It's a bit, perhaps a tiny bit weird, but it's definitely not an ugly setup. What I use is a cheap seat, not nearly as comfortable as the Brooks, but it is padded and it is massive. It does not have that much of a spring on it. There is a spring under it, not that big a deal, not that bulky. And above all, it is really wide. Obviously, there is a weight penalty because this is just a cheap $35 seat. But once you sit on your seat bones, which are comfortably in the center of these well-padded areas, you will really feel a difference, especially on long rides with the foam padding and everything. A lot of people who come to my channel actually buy this seat because it's so cheap. Even if you just pop it on top of a regular standard seat post, just the feeling of you sitting on your seat bones like a motorcycle seat, like as if you were sitting on a Harley Davidson or something. It's really the same kind of saddle. It makes such a difference, and you can get this upgrade for a few dollars. If you don't like it, who cares? You've spent $35. It's not a big deal. So these are the possible configurations that you can get. I would like to mention a few things though. Make sure that you get the exact measurements when you compare seats. In other words, how many grams of weight, how much width. The length is not so important, but the width is very important. This is the width. And some of them give it in inches, some of them in millimeters. You have to convert them to make sure you know what you're doing. This one is 6-inch wide. The other one is a little wider, so you would get a bit more comfort by going with the cambium. Same thing with the big seat. All of them, make sure you have careful measurements. When you get the seat post, if you have a Brompton, your diameter is going to be 31.8. So you'll need to cut out a little fish can or something to fill up that 0.5 millimeter of a gap that's going to open up. If you don't put anything in there, it's still going to work, but every hour or 2 hours you will have to get off the bike and adjust because it's going to keep on sliding down. That's what it used to do when I bought it before I put that homemade shim into the hole. And if you don't have a Brompton, make sure you get from the manufacturer the correct millimeter size. Don't get a 27 millimeter if you have a 31 millimeter. You have to be very precise and meticulous about this. Another thing that's important is the length of it. Measure the seat post you have now and be ready for the consequences. My longest of long Thudbuster LT is not as long as this, so my seat is kind of lower, like down here. I would say it's long enough to fit if you are not over 5'10". If you are taller than that, don't get the Thudbuster. The longest length that you're going to get is from the Redshift, hands down. So if you're a taller person, you may not have a choice unless you want to use an adapter. You can use an adapter, which is even uglier because there's the bump at the bottom. But with an adapter, you can fit anything of any length. It's up to you to make measurements and to calculate everything correctly before you spend hundreds of dollars. All of these seat posts come with a variety of width and also length, so make sure 450 millimeter, that's even longer than mine. It's a really cool length. If you're very tall, then you ride a Brompton or a Birdie or something like that, a Tern, a Dayhan. Most of them require a lot of length. But if you have a short space, if you are on a Moulton and you don't have much space, then it's an easy choice because short seat posts are offered by every manufacturer. If you want an in-depth look into how I built my configuration, which is the most comfortable thing you can come up with, then get the book, and it tells you everything about the suspension setup, but also about the performance, how I built the electrification, how I maxed out the drivetrain, and all of that.
I'll be back.